Hi, host Eric here, host Talking with Fitness People, and I'd like to make this video about what would call the NT conundrum. So, especially NTPs. As NTs, we tend to be frustrated when individuals make feeling-based justifications. And we tend to expect a certain amount of consistency in others when they make claims or arguments or stuff like that. And the NT population as a whole tends to be annoyed by what we consider irrational policy decisions. What I note now, and I hadn't thought of in exactly these words heretofore, is that there is an axiom of FE that can run afoul of an axiom of TI or TE, and yet which is nevertheless an axiom to which NTs tend to subscribe or ascribe. And the axiom is that at the end of the day, reasonable people can agree to disagree, and reasonable people, there's nothing wrong with that part. I agree with that part. Reasonable people can agree to disagree and still be friends and still like each other, and that's a good thing. But what reasonable people can't do is disagree and both be right. If it's about an issue of public policy, and if it's about an issue of prescribing action that has moral impacts upon people other than oneself. So my basic position is that there is one correct position on these things, and it's the one I've stated many times and explained many times. But that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is that it's your position too. You expect everybody else to be consistent in their reasoning too. We've bought into relativism because we've come to believe that whatever it is that's being advocated for, it's possible to come up with lots of reasons why we should do it or shouldn't do it. And it's hard to tell which one's right and which one's wrong, or something like that. So there's no inherent reason to prefer one kind of argument over another kind of argument, that people have been disagreeing about this stuff for centuries, that there's no reason to think that there's any single solution, that compromise is almost always preferable, a whole bunch of axioms that run afoul of embracing the notion that, well, there's two notions wrapped up here. One, that one of the groups got it right, because most of us are still thinking about ourselves in terms of group affiliation. It's like a South Park episode where it turns out heaven picks the one religion that gets it right, and it's the Mormons. And they get to go to Mormon heaven. Everybody else has to go to hell because, of course, they picked the wrong religion. Well, that's absurd. You're trying to say the same basic thing, Eric. You've got the one truth and everybody else is wrong. It's not the same. Not the same at all. And yeah, that's what I'm saying. Saying, to the extent that you're not agreeing with my framing of things, you are both wrong, your positions are arbitrary, learned and internalized based on faulty assumptions and a misunderstanding of the nature of human individuals and how they relate to one another. You also misunderstand the nature of rights if you're not agreeing with me, because you want to talk about people either rights not being real. I pointed out in an earlier episode that you're born screaming, and that no one can stop you except by killing you or drugging you, basically. Now, the issue of rights is a simple one. Does the doctor have a duty to not kill the baby, even if the baby's being very noisy and annoying? Yes. Well, where does that duty come from? You could say it's contractual duty. He has that as well as a contractual duty. But forget about the doctor. Let's say the father says, you know what, I changed my mind. This baby's going to be too noisy. I can tell already. Just enough. I have the right to not listen to that crap. So I'm going to smother my baby to death. And the doctor goes, well, just because you can scream doesn't mean you have the right to scream. Well, it does mean that only with coercion can you stop me. And there's a lot of things in life you would say, well, only with coercion can we stop you. Right, well, we shouldn't use coercion to stop people from doing things. We should use coercion when we're responding to people having done bad things. So, if in fact the baby stops just screaming and picks up the phone and decides to swat the hospital to get back for leaving it in the box in that incubator room for all night, and then we get hold of somebody's cell phone and it swats the hospital. Says, oh, police force, listen, there's armed gunmen who are roaming the hallways of the hospital. Please come fast. Well, now the baby has engaged in a rights violating behavior, which is the baby made a claim knowing that claim would produce harmful actions, knowing that the claim was false. That's the key element. And thus can be held accountable for that particular form of expression. Why? Because it fails the reciprocal burdens test. And that's ultimately the test we use for everything, and we ought to use for everything. The reciprocal burdens test simply says whatever the justification you use for your action, the corollary, I get to use the corollaries and two equivalent actions. So if you get to justify violating my rights because you've concluded that my behavior is in violation of the law, even though it has done no harm, for example, like we were talking about a stop sign earlier with Abraham and the a few other people we brought over, running a stop sign. They said, well, but you're endangering everybody. But I'm not. That's the thing. I'm rolling a stop sign. And then you get down to, well, I know you're not actually doing anything dangerous, but we have to follow the rules, because if you don't, then people will do dangerous things, and then that'll be bad. Okay, except that's when we get into this problem again, right? You're predicting that people can't handle being unsupervised. But in fact, almost all the evidence we have suggests that people can handle their own supervision issues on a case-by-case basis. So we know that fire's dangerous. We know that gasoline's dangerous. We know lots of things are dangerous potentially if misused. We understand that parents will provide the supervision for their children and how they use these things. We understand that there is a range of opinions about exactly what's showing sufficient care that we might all conclude that something is reckless and endangers others if we see an extreme example. But that doesn't mean that that behaviors like rolling a stop sign correlate with more dangerous behavior, nor does it mean that behaviors like violating rights for rolling a stop sign correlates with less dangerous behavior. These actual questions need to be asked, and even if we could show definitively, quote unquote, that there's a correlation that exists, we'd have to account for so many variables and we'd have to the conclusion is conditional on the fact that there's not variables that we didn't account for. We're going to select. We're only going to be able to access, to include in our data, some consequences of it, not all, and we're going to select the ones we include and the ones we don't. Some we'll think are linked too weakly. Some are linked strongly enough, and all those things are judgment calls. So what we end up doing is thinking to ourselves something different. We go, look, we know these solutions exist. They're in place. I know we got speeding ticket laws, cops, but people keep speeding down our street. It runs parallel to a big street, and people take it as a shortcut going home. They're in a big hurry, and they're riding down the street, and we're worried that our kids are going to get hit, and it's dangerous, puts us too much risk, and we got to act now before tragedy happens. So let's take action. You need to position police here and give a lot of tickets. No, that's not actually what they did in this particular instance I'm talking about. They put speed bumps there because the cops aren't going to sit there all day and night policing that one thing. And even if they do, then it becomes what's known as a speed trap, right? Where they go to a road where they know everybody's safely and successfully driving over the speed limit. In this instance, I've justified the rights violation because I've said, well, it's endangering children playing in the street or on that street. Note that nobody's saying that children are endangered by vehicles traveling the same rate of speed on the big street that's parallel to it. It's because this seems like a residential street. It's a zoning issue. Okay, well now, first of all, okay, fine. We're getting into local issues here. And we see how the local community deals with it. The local community says they might do one of two things. If it's an isolated local community and you think that most of the people traveling and making this mistake are out-of-towners, let's say you're in the middle of nowhere, there's a good chance you're going to say, let's go, local police department. Here's how we're going to fund our city projects. That's what there's a good chance you're going to do. In my opinion, that would be the role of higher government, is to police that level of government and prevent that kind of shit from happening. If it's a community that they think is mostly community members who are doing that, then they have a genuine interest and perhaps a genuine need to stop community members from doing that. But we find a non-punishment methodology, a non-coercive method. We put speed bumps there. If you really want to speed, go ahead. Go ahead. If you speed too much, you won't be able to do it but a few times before your car starts to fall apart. So, that's a good solution. That's a non-rights violating solution. If in fact this thing that you're worried about is so important to be attended to, let's find a non-rights violating solution. Now, I don't like speed bumps. I think that they are a concession to the oh, but think of the children crowd, I don't like that crowd. I don't agree with that crowd. I think that they're constantly doing things for what is known in the policy world as security theater. It's not... in fact, there's a whole set of ideas, theories and stuff about the importance of maintaining security theater so that it's all sorts of bullshit reasons, so they're mostly psychological. Enemies of the United States will be emboldened by oh no, emboldening. We don't want to be guilty of any emboldening. So, the answer to all of these sort of questions is, how can I possibly sit here and say Eric is right about everything? If you disagree with this framework and you advocate policies other than this, you are wrong. That you are manifesting the internalized authoritarianism that we were all, which comprised the soil in which we all grew. School. We assume there's some expert, some authority who knows best, who's making decisions, and if some protocol or some rule or some way of doing things violates our fundamental intuition about it, that we should prioritize the status quo. There's this rule that says if somebody makes extraordinary claims, they should have to produce extraordinary evidence to support those claims. Well, but my core position is I'm not the one making extraordinary claims. Everybody else is making extraordinary claims to justify that which is not justifiable. However, even if you do think my claims are extraordinary, that I have the one right answer, quote unquote, remember, number one, I'm not claiming to have made it up, although there may be some specific details that I include that spike some stuff, basically. So that address a couple of weak spots, shore them up a little bit, but minor details. The bulk of all these concepts was not, or predates me by quite a long time. So there's that. I'm not claiming to have come up with some idea that changes the world, but to the extent that I could lay claim to any such sentence, it would be this idea instead of the negative rights framework. It would be the idea that it is time for us as NTs to stop being hypocritical. We hold the feelers accountable to provide logical justifications for their positions that they state. And when they don't, we sometimes even ridicule them, right? Look at Sargon of Assad. He goes around and ridicules people for their wrongness. I'd like to think I don't do that. I would like to think I passionately and forthrightly and honestly argue that the alternative to the positions that I'm stating fail any standard that would allow us to prefer them to what I am giving you as an option. The reason that being, they're not consistent with themselves. They rely upon either contradictory premises, or alternately, they just simply apply different mechanisms. In analogous situations, they'll apply different mechanisms. And they'll justify it with different justifications, and they'll demand no consistency within the framework for themselves. There's no reason to assume that any individual's pet reason for justifying rights violations is preferable and ought to be embraced, while the other bad justifications for rights violations ought to be dismissed. That's going to be a matter of endless dispute. If we begin the question by assuming, yes, we're going to violate some rights. Now, how should we violate them? What's more important to violate about? Blah, blah, blah. Then we're missing the point. You are at that point, you're trying to argue policy. It would be like trying to argue astronomy using the concentric circles model of the universe as your methodology to explain things. It doesn't matter how great your explanation is, it's built upon a faulty idea that somehow there's a right reason to do the wrong thing.